Hello and welcome to the Mari tour by the Foundry. In this introductory video, we'll be looking at channels, shaders, and how to apply textures using the various tools within the Mari package. So when you open the actual Mari package, what you find here is our main screen. We're going to load our projects to. We also have over here on the left hand side the toolbars with all our tools inside it. We have the main project page. We can open an archive ourselves and copy. We have the main toolbar at the top. What we need to first of all start a new project for this one. So we need to give it a name. So we're going to be calling this one Anvil, because it is an Anvil object, underscore user tex. So this is the Anvil user textured model. Now we've given it a name, we need to provide an actual geometry for this one. So we can actually find here the main geometry for a project, which is the Anvil. So we click the Anvil as an OBJ format, click open, and then we have our main geometry with a UV map present. What we need to do now is create some channels. So if we right click over the actual viewer, we can actually do add custom channels, create channels all. So we're just going to create all the channels one by one. And we can click them individually, but for this one we need them all there. Once you've actually loaded your model, you can see it in the viewer. You can use the Alt and the left mouse button to actually rotate and move the object so you can see around it and start actually getting a good view of what you have to paint. Get a feel for this. You can also right click on the viewer anywhere, actually load some different property panels. You can also use the Alt and the actual right click to do a zoom. If you right click on the actual viewer itself, you should bring up the display properties panel. Within this you can actually change the default settings and actually things like the wireframe and activate the smooth. You can also bring up the actual ground plane so you can see where your object is orientated. You can also change the colors of where your selections are. So if we look over here on the actual objects tab, we can actually bring in another piece of geometry. In this case I'm just clicking the add button and I've selected the apron. Once you do this, you can actually load up many different types of geometry from your original scene. You can also press the I buttons to actually view them and the padlock buttons to lock them so they can't be altered. Let's just delete this for now. You can use the numeric keys to actually press 1 through 6 to get different views of the actual objects you have. So let's begin painting. What we need to do is get a paintbrush. It's located there. And what we need to do is actually go to our channels tab. Make sure we're clicking on the actual color. We're painting in that channel. And we actually bring a brush up. Bring up the brush editor palette. We can actually see we can populate our properties bin with any palette that we wish to use just by going onto view and palettes. You can see we have a whole list of palettes we have now. What we need to pick is the lights. Just click them down. Now with Mari you can actually drag and drop the palettes however you choose, and it actually resizes the screen to actually fit all the property bins in there. So we can drop it at the top and it auto resizes. Let's just actually dock this to the right hand side. So we can cycle through our menus that we actually populate with our properties pad. Let's click on the actual color so we know what we're painting in. Let's go into the actual brush editor. As you can see in the brush editor we have a lot of presets in here. We have the hard brushes and the organic brushes which are already pre-made for us. Let's go back to the default brushes. Let's pick a nice soft brush. As you can see when you move over the viewer, the actual radius of the brush is too big, and you can see that on the scratch pad as well. What we need to do is go into the properties and find the radius option and bring this down a little bit. As you can see, we can scratch pad again just to see how we actually lay down the paint stroke and how the brush works. Let's just do a quick paint stroke in the actual viewer. And we're going to be actually pressing B to bake this down. And you can see you can either press B or move the object once you've laid a paint stroke down to bake it into the actual UV map of the object. As you can see, we've got a little bad edge over here, it's quite bleeding in there. There's another paint stroke down, and if we move the actual object, it will bake this into the actual UV map again. Now what we need to do is actually paint into the buffer of this. So by default this is to auto bake and clear. So once you lay a paint stroke in the buffer and move the object, it is automatically baked into the actual UV map. Change this, we actually use the manual mode. As you can see now, I've painted my paint stroke into the buffer, yet as we move the object, it does not get baked down. As you can see, when we resize this by pressing the Alt and the right click button on the mouse, we can actually zoom in, and the paint stroke automatically resizes to suit the zoom level. So we can actually see what we paint. We can paint this down by pressing B on the keyboard. Just laying down a couple of paint strokes to show you the actual zoom level that we can do. Pressing B again, and you can see the paint stroke auto resizes. We can clear the actual paint buffer by clicking on the X button next to the round circle. There we go. As you can see, once we've baked something down, we can't actually alter the paint stroke. We can only alter the paint stroke once it actually exists in the buffer. As you can see now, you can actually manipulate and delete part of this paint stroke using the eraser button. And we can bake this down again by pressing B on the keyboard. As you can see, we can only alter one. Let's just clear the paint buffer again. Now what we need to do here is go into the History tab. And if you notice clearly, we actually have over here the paint strokes and the camera movements within the actual History tab itself. Now what we need to do is go to the top of this and click on Empty. So now we've done this, but we need to actually set some paint strokes down properly. So we click on the Colors tab, we can actually sample a little bit of red here, and I'm just going to click on the actual Paint button. So we can lay some strokes down. As you can see, I can lay some strokes here, really gently and easily. We can press the actual Control and Z to do an undo and remove the paint strokes. Let's clear the paint buffer. What we need to do is use the Image Manager. What we can do is actually paint these actual images as textures directly onto the actual object. We can do this by using the Paint Through tool. This actually lets you take an image from the Image Manager and actually paint it directly onto the actual anvil object. As you can see, by clicking the actual different tools, the HUD changes for different tooltips. Load one up by pressing the arrow key. We're just going to navigate to an object, an image that we need. In this case, I'm going to click a coal one. Just load this in, and it loads it into the actual object's pan. What we can do simply just pick one up and drag it directly onto the actual viewer itself. Now we can actually resize this by holding down the actual Shift and the left mouse button to resize this. And as you can see, do exactly what it says in the tin and paint through directly onto the actual model. So we have a go at this and just play around with it and get a good handle for the actual way it works. So we just bake this down. And you can see we have this on the viewer as well as on the buffer channel. So as you can see, we can resize this and go close to the model as well. We can bake it pressing B and bring the actual model itself. Just clear the paint buffer. And you can see we've painted the texture directly onto the model really quickly and really easily. This tool and workflow really improves the speed of your texturing when using this. So let's just undo this, clear the paint buffer again, and what we need to do is bring the actual image back on again. And you can see we can paint in two ways. We can either paint on the model itself or on the UV view. Just paint on here. We can see the buffer always exists again, and we can simply clear the paint buffer again. So what we can do is we can actually paint directly onto the UV map again. Let's just get this back in view. So what we need to do is press the number 1 on the numeric keypad, and when we bring up the actual paint through button again, we can actually drop this on, and we can use the actual hotkeys of this to actually move this around and change around using the Shift and the Alt for rotation and panning and zooming. And we can also do is stamp the actual text directly on instead of painting it. So we can press the actual semicolon and actually bake this down and stamp the actual texture on. And you can see it exists in the paint buffer again, so we need to clear it. As you can see, I've actually baked this option down, except we've got a lot of bleeding edges over here, and the actual paint is going onto the sides of this. Now we need to prevent this from happening. This is really bad texture painting. So we'll just undo this and clear the paint buffer again. We can go into the actual projection tab, and we can see we have a masking option here. We have something called edge masking. Now if we turn this on, we can actually see that wherever we paint in the actual grey section we painted, and wherever's in the actual blue section will not be painted. Actually preserves the edges for us, as the name suggests, edge masking. We can control the actual levels of this using the value sliders over here and reset them by pressing R. Just want to click this a little bit better so you can just see the edges of here. So when we paint on this, the only viewing side we have here and the edges won't bleed. Just soften this a little bit. So we do the same procedure again, bring up the actual texture using the paint through tab, and press the actual semicolon to stamp this down. And once we do this and bake it down pressing B, because remember we're still in actual manual paint mode, we need to clear the buffer of this. And if we just turn edge masking off, we can see we've preserved the edges and we only painted the direction we've actually seen. So we've got nice clean edges over here. and the paint isn't bleeding onto different sides of the actual model we see. Got a nice clean edge. So what we need to do is repeat this process for each sides of the actual anvil. So we can press the number 2 on this and turn the edge masking back on again. And that hotkey for this one is if we can press G on the keyboard, we can actually toggle the actual map on and off. So we go ahead and proceed to number 3 on the top view. Just resize this by holding down the control key. I'm just laying this down again by pressing B. I'm just pulling this on. We need to fix the edge over here because it wasn't quite large enough. And press the actual B again just to bake this on. Now don't worry about actual hard edges over here. We can fix them in a minute and actually blend them together. So now we've done this, we can go into the next view and do the same thing. At the minute, it's actually the projection was on the actual buffer viewer there, so we clear the buffer. I'll do the same thing again. I'm pressing the semicolon key. And you can always see what you're actually using and the tools you need by looking at the HUD for the hotkey shortcuts of what the tool does. Just clear the buffer. As you can see, we've got a bit of a hard edge there, but it doesn't matter, we'll clear that in a minute. Do the same thing for numeric key number 6. Paint, and we'll just fix the blank edge there. And bake this down. So just clear the buffer again. And the last side, we just missed one. Bake this down. Same thing for the other side. And we've actually textured the entire model really quickly. So when we look at this one, the edge masking is still on, so what we need to do is just have a look at this and see how this is blending together. We'll just turn this off quickly. So what we need to do is go back to the Channels tab. As you can see, we've populated and painted the actual color section. We need to actually paint in the other actual color channels.